everybody. Welcome to Wisdom from North, the place where we're diving into the deeper meaning of life and asking the big questions. My name is Jannike, and today I'm here with Alfred Tolle, who's had a long international career in the corporate world. And he resigned from his job in Google as a chief executive in order to create a global movement called Wisdom Together. And Wisdom Together aims to contribute to a world of wisdom in which societies, businesses, and individuals promote and sustain the well-being for all. And in October, they're having a conference in Oslo, Norway. Hello, Alfred. How are you doing? Welcome.
Hey, Annika. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me at your and making an interview with me.
Yeah, I'm very excited about your work. I think it's so beautiful, and I looked into it, and I love the word wisdom. I'm always seeking wisdom, and I think it's very interesting the leap you took from a secure, exciting, good job in Google, and then taking that leap and starting to work with wisdom and self-development and meditation. So I'm curious about that story before we go into what Wisdom Together is, why you made that choice.
Well, actually, the search for wisdom or for purpose is something which came up very early in my life. I had a scholarship which brought me to Japan. That was nearly about 30 years ago, and in Japan, I got in touch with Buddhism, with Zen Buddhism, and I saw people sitting in front of a wall for a couple of hours or even more, and I was wondering, what are these guys doing? So at that time, I joined them, and I went into a monastery, and I got a very good abbot who I could ask questions like, what is the meaning of life, and why am I here for, and what am I supposed to do, and what is the meaning of meditation, and what is the purpose of it? And we had a long conversation where he gave me, certain answers which not really satisfied me in a way like a cognitive understanding. It was more a kind of task to find out what he really meant, and that accompanied me through my whole life. So for instance, he gave me one question or one answer on my questions where he said, Alfred, you should know that there is no right or wrong, there is no good or bad in this world. And I was like, at that time, I had quite a bit of understanding which is right and which is wrong. I had my values, and that guided me through my life at that time. So it was kind of irritating for me to find out what he meant, and that actually was the beginning of my search for a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose.
I remember you had a talk where you said that you had a quite profound experience also when you were a young boy. And it seemed to me that something started there, that you had a knowledge that perhaps others, don't have, that it taught you something. And I remember it had to do with your father in the hospital. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, that was actually before this experience in Japan. But when I was 9, my mother died by a car accident. And 3 years later, my father died through a heart attack. And he had this heart attack during the night, and I accompanied him. I was barely 13. I accompanied him to the hospital, and I wasn't allowed to go into the emergency room. So I was sitting in front of the door, and 10 minutes later, the doctor came out and he said, look, I'm sorry, but we couldn't do anything. So, and then he left, and it was barely middle of the night, or it was about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was sitting there on a very quiet kind of this hospital floor, and I felt that I could see myself from an upper position. And it was a strange feeling where time and space were no longer existing. It was like a flow where everything is possible, and I could see everything at the same time. And this is just my explanation, is a reflection on my feeling at that time. At that time, I didn't really recognize that it was just a strange feeling, which was of course I was sad. Of course I was deeply kind of disturbed, but on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, I also felt a kind of power which came into my body and into my soul, and I felt like, wow, this is interesting. So it was not that I felt I'm losing somebody. It was more like, my father has changed his dimension, and he went to another level. So and that was actually which also helped me in my life, that I always felt that my parents were still with me, and in a different shape and in a different form, not in their kind of materialized bodies or so, but in this connection, which I think is still there, even though I feel that after a certain time, when my parents felt that I had developed and I could understand and manage and perceive my life in the right way, I felt that they also moved on in the dimension where they were at this moment.
Wow, that's interesting. So this has been a natural part of you, I guess, and I can kind of understand why you wanted to, share more about this. Tell us a little bit about how you created Wisdom Together, how the idea came to you, being in Google.
Yeah, so working barely around the world, was a media company from Germany. I was for a long time in Japan. That was after I had the scholarship. I was responsible for Southeast Asia, so I was traveling quite a bit around in that area. And then I was on the board of a very successful listed internet company in Korea, which then bought an American company, Lycos, and I was there as a CEO. They brought me over there. And at that time, Lycos, or beforehand, Lycos was one of the first search engines. So at that time, when I took over, Lycos had only 300 people or 350 people, and Google had already 6,000. But I met at that time Sergey and Larry as well, who said, look, when you guys were 3,000 people in Boston with Lycos, we had only 4. And we were questioning, what are you guys doing with 3,000 people search engine? So it was this kind of reflection on, what makes a company, grow, and also, how can you keep a kind of understanding of humanity while working in a business environment which is growing so quickly or declining so quickly as well, so have a lot of change. And later on, Google asked me to join their European headquarter in Dublin. And I actually, it took me a time to make the decision to join Google, because I didn't know whether I should do this. So I made a vision quest for me to find out, is that the right way to do it? Is that the right path?
What is a
vision quest? What is a vision? So there are 2 psychologists in California a long time ago. They looked at indigenous people, and they did a research on what are these people doing when one phase of their life ended and another phase starts. And usually it's actually culturally, across culture, more or less the same, that they are taking some time off to say goodbye to the former part of their life and welcome, the next phase of their life. And usually it goes hand in hand with fasting and you be alone, for some time in the forest or somewhere. And they founded a school of lost borders, which is based on these principles. And they did some training for people who brought that then to Europe. So I went in France with a group of people, and I went in the forest, and I spent 5 days in the forest alone, and just reflecting on myself without eating anything, and just thinking about what I'm supposed to do in the next phase. Is that the right decision, or should I do it, or shouldn't I do it? And then you go back into the group, and then you're reflecting on your experience, which is really an enlightening kind of experience which you have there. And the answer which I got out was, it really doesn't matter what you do. It's a question of the attitude you have for and what you're doing. So I went to Google and I said, look, guys, you want to hire me for marketing and sales. I was responsible at that time for Scandinavia and Benelux. And but I also want to do, really meaningful things. Meaningful means helping the world to get to a big place. And they said to me, look, as long as the numbers are green, you can do whatever you want. And that enabled me. That enabled me actually to had wonderful people from whole of Scandinavia, but also from the Benelux, young people who gave a certain amount of their time to do with me projects like leadership development. Together with Otto Schammer, we tried to build an institute inside of Google for leadership development, for leaders for the world, not necessarily for Google, because that is what Larry Page once said. Google should build leaders for the world, not for Google. Right. And I took him by the word and I said, let's try to do that. Let's try what that means. What kind of leadership does the world need? What kind of leaders? And is our programs, which we have, really aligned with this vision? So I spoke with Laszlo Bock, who was the head of HR at that time, and I said, let's do it. Let's try to find that out, how we can build that. So we did that, and a lot of, healthy and good discussion came out of it. And then we had, I did some projects on happiness. Is happiness differently perceived in different countries and different cultures? Worked together with positive psychologists like Tanya Singer, professor from the Max Planck Institute, who did a long-term study on loving kindness meditation and what that means for your neurocortex, for your brain, and for your social behavior. So we brought that in. I did a conference together with Wisdom 2.0 in America to brought that over to Europe. Did a first conference in Dublin together with Søren Gorthammer, who established Wisdom 2.0. And we did some peace projects based on the assumption that of morphogenetic fields, from Rupert Sheldrake. And I was observing that animals are actually reacting on a typhoon or an event like that long before the event happens. So if animals reacting on this, I was thinking about then probably humans will react as well or have this feeling. And how can you see that? Probably on the behavior on search. What kind of keywords are they looking for? You
mean that we perceive an experience before it's happening in a way?
Yes.
Right. They've actually done studies on that with the heart. A Heart Math Institute in California, that they have many random pictures coming, and like frightening pictures, beautiful pictures, and then the heart reacts like I don't know how when it reacts, but like maybe a small second before the picture flashes up. So it will be frightened if it's a frightening picture that's coming, and the heart will know in advance. And that's quite fascinating.
Yeah. Well, that is actually Heisenberg, the physician, had, he's a quantum physics person, professor for quantum physics, and he actually had in 1937 already, he made an experiment where he said, that the intention of the scientist who would do an experiment has an effect on the reaction of the photons. So if that is true, and if we know that everything is based on photons, more or less, then that our intention is creating a field which goes out consciously or unconsciously, and that can be measurable. And the Heart Math Institute is based on that theory, more or less, that there is an electromagnetic field which a heart is creating And depending on your personal development, this electromagnetic field goes, is very large or smaller around you, but everybody has that.
Right.
So they did some experiment, and that was based on that I said, okay, if something is happening on a higher field, and there is a lot of studies around this. Erwin Laszlo is talking about the psi field. C.G. Jung is talking about the collective archetypes. Everything is actually existing where you can tap into, and the flow, which some people talk about when they talk about new ideas which come, is actually when you connect yourself with your own potential and the higher field.
Sorry, you broke out. What did you say? The last, that how we get ideas. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So you get ideas by connecting to yourself, to your intuition, to your personal potential with a higher field. So Professor Erwin Laszlo is defining that as a psi field, which is actually information all there at the same time, and not depending on space and time. It's there, and depending on where your focus is, which will be materialized. And there are currently a lot of studies around this, from Stanford, Oxford, Harvard. Everybody is looking into this. So it's not.
Is that is that part of the mission for Wisdom Together? Is actually to share knowledge about this, how we can tap into this intelligence? Because that would be huge for individuals if we could learn how to tap into an intelligence.
Yeah. Otto Scharmer is talking about tapping into the collective intelligence, and I think the world is needing that right now. We have some challenges in front of us, which we actually also create through our own kind of mind setting. So if we have, and that is why I created Wisdom Together, which was a kind of an inner calling to say you have to quit Google and have to go out and do what you need to do now. So, and the intention is to create spaces and places where people come together to have the chance to get deeper into their intuition by developing a collective consciousness, an individual and then a collective consciousness. And by understanding who you are, I'm confident that people would make better decisions for their personal life as well as for their environment and for the world at all.
And I thought it was so beautiful that you're saying that instead of having the focus on generating, money, we need to have the focus on generating generosity, like in the corporate world. Can you talk a little
Absolutely.
bit about that? That is a huge shift,
It is actually, I think it started that way. When we spoke about businesses or when we spoke about economy, it was actually servicing a society and servicing a need for the environment and for people and for all living species in this world. It shifted at a certain point of time. Actually, Pavdan Sukhdev wrote a book about this, and he called it Corporation 220. He was referring to a lawsuit which was actually happening against Henry Ford because he wanted to have cars for everybody and wanted to make it cheaper so that everybody could afford it. And his two partners who had invested in his company sued him for that because they thought that the margins went down. So, and they won the lawsuit. At that time was a shift. The major shift from servicing a need in society towards shareholder value. And you can see what kind of laws and what kind of legal structures was developed based on that kind of lawsuit. And that shifted our mindset more and more into, shareholder value. And it separated, business, actually the rest of the world. And I think it's time to reflect back, to go back into why are we here for, why are we doing what we're doing? And is that really beneficiary for everybody? Which doesn't mean that everybody is the same, but it just means that we should be aware about our actions and about the effect of our actions on a broader scale. Not only how can I make myself more money, how can I make my shareholders more money? So it's more about how do I contribute, and do I contribute by producing what I'm producing for our world, for nature, for the society, for every species in this world, and for that, for myself as well, because I'm a part of this whole environment.
Yeah, it's a totally different way. It's about the attitude, the way you're doing it. I thought it was so interesting that that is what your answer was when you went into the woods, that it's not about what you're doing, but about your attitude. And I guess I was interpreting that as if you are a loving person giving good energy, that will create wonderful things too. You don't have to be like a big speaker to change the world in a way. So I thought that was really great message. But I want to move forward and speak a little bit about, how we measure prosperity, because you were also mentioning in the talk that we're usually measuring prosperity and gross national product. But for instance, a country like Bhutan is measuring it with gross national happiness. And I thought that was so, that moved me so much. It makes so sense. Would you think that is possible, that we could be influenced and inspired by Bhutan, and that more people or more countries can look at that perspective instead?
Well, actually, there are two people coming from Bhutan to our Oslo conference, and we will talk about first the former education minister. We'll talk about what happiness and this concept means to education, so to future leaders, actually. And secondly, Julia Kim is coming. She's also working in the Gross National Happiness Center in Bhutan, because they were asked to bring compassion into a big corporation in Thailand, which makes about $8 billion revenue per year. And they asked, the CEO asked to bring compassion into it, so to measure success differently than just material wealth and growth. So when I was, I think 2 years ago, I was participating in a global well-being lab, which was supported by the German government, as well as was a presenting institute from Otto Scharmer. And one of my colleagues there were Lorenzo Fioramonti. He is a professor for economics and politics who will also come to the Oslo conference. His topic is gross national products, which where he said it's not gross national products, it's gross national problems. So he is looking at alternative measurements in the world which are existing, and gross national happiness is one of that. There is a social indicator index, which is applied by Costa Rica, for instance. And there are other measurements which are actually applied by states inside of America, like Oregon, Maryland, Idaho. They all, went beyond GDP. So I think, to your question, can we learn from that? Yes. The initiative, which at that time, 2012, the Prime Minister from Bhutan did, he brought this idea and framework into the United Nations. And I think about 100 countries were participating in this, kind of experiment of what would that mean for their countries. And parts of that ideas also went into the Sustainable Development Goals, which were then afterwards sent out to 191 states in the world. And from that moment on, this kind of different thinking became very popular. Especially after 2008, when we had this crisis, everybody was asking, is that the right way how we do business? Is that the right way how we measure our success? Purely about money, which is actually only an imagination at the end of the road, because money is only powerful if we give them the power. If we don't, it's not powerful. And we actually want to make money to help people to grow in their personality, have access to healthcare, have access to education. That is why we're doing what we're doing. And what I felt, especially in this discussion 2008 and after, was more like we need to consolidate a concept. So the concept became more important than the human beings. So I thought that is not sustainable. We should put the person and the beings more in the center and look from, okay, not who is our economy needing in the future. The question should be reframed into what kind of economy do we want in the future, and that put the people again in the focus. That implies that we have to look into different measurements. And actually, to our conference, Lorenzo is coming directly from Edinburgh, from Scotland. Because we started an initiative which we called We7, Wellbeing 7 States, countries who were inspired and willing to discuss alternative measurements than GDP. And the first country who took that on and invited policymakers from around the world was Scotland. And so there will be a conference happening on the 19th and 20th of October. So right actually before our conference in Oslo. And Lorenzo is talking there, and he's coming over and bringing the new results also to our conference there in Oslo.
Interesting. And to something dire, I heard that you mentioned that you had been speaking to investment bankers in New York that said that, on the same lines actually that we're talking about, that now I'm having a feedback here, that in 2 to 5 years our finances and the economical state would not be very good in the world, that it might even be worse than 2008. And I was wondering what, because I know Wisdom Together is also focusing on environment, like what do you think we can do with that? Like as individuals, how can we meet these challenges? It's kind of frightening.
Well, yes, it is. There's a lot of change in this world, and this was always the place. But I think we are currently at a special point in our history, which gives us an opportunity as well as also challenges in front of us. And the challenge is if we are not ready to change the way we're doing business, the way we're going to live together, and the way we're going to perceive our personal development. That are the 3 areas which we would like to support from Wisdom Together as well. So when I'm talking to investment bankers in New York, some of them have this opinion, and I quote one statement always because I like it so much. It shows one extreme. This person said, look, why should I care about future generations? What have they done for me? And that shows actually completely the focus on yourself, not on the future, and maximizing myself and shareholder values. But there are other people who are working, even people who are working in this environment, are saying this is not sustainable. We know that, but we don't know what to do. We don't know how we can break through it. And I think the way how we explore new ways of doing business together and living together is to bring scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, spiritual leaders together and exploring new ideas. And not only that this is ideas on a conceptual level, but there are already actually existing formats who tried something out. And that doesn't mean that this could be copied all over the world, because we have cultural differences, we're living in different circumstances, but we can be inspired. We can think, wow, this is possible. So let's think about it. One example, for instance, is there is an initiative years ago from Michelle Zhang in Oakland, California. She founded an ecological restaurant by going to farmers and asking them to switch to ecological farming, and she would buy their products to, provide ecological food to people. And that concept became so successful that she created several restaurants and department stores and so on and so forth. She became wealthy, and she said, that is not what I wanted. I didn't want it to become wealthy. What I wanted to change the ecosystem. So she went to her competitors and said, look, here is what I did. I want to share that with you. I want you joining a movement which is changing the ecosystem. And out of this, there is a movement with more than 20 companies right now called BALI. It's Business Alliance of Local Living Economies, who are not, the focus is not mainly on money, even though they're making money, but the focus is in contributing to the society, and the money that they make is covering the cost, and on top what they make as profit, they give back into the community that this movement can grow. That is only one example, but there are other examples in this world of large companies and smaller companies and entrepreneurs who are thinking along those lines and really trying something out. And that is what we would like to initiate. And what we would like to bring on stage at conferences like in Oslo.
Yeah, that's so inspiring to hear. And I mean, the leaders have an important role, and you speak a little bit about conscious leadership and mindfulness and meditation even. So how can we inspire politicians, for instance, to become conscious leaders?
Well, I think the politicians, it's a good question. Same actually if you're going to big companies and big corporations. It's very hard to change big corporations, especially if they are listed, because the framework of a listed company and a political system, which is kind of similar, is so tight that the politicians themselves and CEOs of listed companies have really, really limited freedom to decide what they want to do. That's why, our focus is on young entrepreneurs as well as on mid-sized companies, family-owned or private-owned companies, who have the ability to decide quite quickly how would they want to change and what they want to do with their money. That is easier. But still, I think there are so many good people, like in Google, which I experience. There are wonderful people in Google, in Facebook, in Apple, in every of these companies where I have close friends, and all of them, know about the challenges and the problems, and a lot of them were really willing to support that and try to change in their ecosystem, in their little small world, what they can do, and support us from inside. I call it inside the system. When I'm talking to politicians, currently, and what I learned it's all over the world, but in Norway, it's currently also a time for a shift and a change. From this kind of heavy relied on oil resources economy, shifting into something new. And I think that is on the one hand side a very luxurious position, because the foundation is still quite solid. So from where you can think about to do something, but this also needs an understanding that it's urgent to really do something and really develop something and be brave in decisions and making hard decisions. If you do that, you can become, even as a smaller country like Norway, you can become in the future one of the countries who has a leading position in certain areas. So this could be ecology, for instance. This could be sustainability. How do we do something in sustainability? But this could also be in personal development, which means, if you do something together with artists, that's why artists are so important for us as well, because good artists are working with their intuition. If you combine this and not see as something separate from you, but seeing it as something which has an effect on you. And if you reflect on yourself, on your reaction, you understand much more from yourself. And that is something which helps you to personally develop. So we can initiate something there in Norway, and I met so wonderful people actually in Norway, which have this mindset and want to do something and working in this direction. And some of them will be at the conference and will speak about this. Some investors coming in doing social investments, some artists coming in working with business and art. And some scientists coming in talking about mindfulness and what does it mean to your brain and what does it mean to public health to do meditation or to mindful practices. So we speak about these topics and find out, okay, what did other countries or institutes do? What are the results? What can we learn? What can we learn from each other? And what does it mean for the society and this current situation of Norway right now?
I think it's so inspiring, and I'm thinking that I think it's so good that you're doing this, like coming from the corporate world and speaking about self-development, because I have a feeling that that's not a word I hear often in the newspapers here in Norway, and it's not we're not talking about following our intuition on television and stuff like that. And I'm a bit curious about the reactions you meet when you contact leaders and politicians to come to the conferences. Are they starting to open up to speak about this, or are they still a bit hesitant because they're afraid that it's going to be associated with something they don't want to be associated with? Or yes.
Well, I feel that in the last 5 years, societies have opened up, and there are different countries, of course. In different countries, I have different experiences, but I feel that more and more consciousness, awareness, conscious leadership, mindfulness are words which leads to a curiosity instead of a hesitation to get into it. Often people look at what America did in the last years. So you can see that big investment banks, you can see that the large companies, successful companies are trying to use these mindfulness practices and conscious leadership models actually to really try to redefine the way they go business and how they approach the world. And you see that UK, for instance, has 2 or 3 years ago signed a legal draft that brings consciousness, or not MBSR but MBTC, meditation-based cognitive therapy, into education of the school system. That is a therapy which is based on Professor Mark Williams from Oxford University, who worked through his life on depression. And since our societies have so much to suffer from depression, the United Nations recently came up with a research that 10% of our population worldwide are suffering from depression, which is about 750 million people or even more. And most of them are actually in our industrialized world, in the so-called developed world. And that led to the conclusion in UK that they need to do something against it. And what they connected Mark Williams, and he had worked together with John Kabat-Zinn on meditation and how you can use meditation for more self-awareness and self-confidence. So they signed it, and they now are bringing that into their education system. So we can learn from other countries. And that is also when I'm coming in, I'm not talking about, you all should do meditation and transcend. So I'm talking about how can you use meditation to understand your potential and coming to your own kind of perception of the world and give you more flexibility for the challenges which you're facing right now. And coming with scientists and scientific results helps. Right. Because there are a lot of scientific studies right now which are open and which has been proven and which has been presented at the Economic Forum in Davos, for instance, so that people will say, if that has been presented there, if countries are doing it like UK, if companies are doing it like Apple, like Amazon, like these folks, then there must be something on it. So I got this reaction often. And then we can break it down and said, okay, what does it mean for you concretely? What can you do? And what are the challenges what you are facing? And that opened up the door, and that creates a kind of dialogue, which are very healthy, I think.
Wonderful. Yeah, I feel like a lot is happening, even though we don't see it in the mainstream media necessarily, but it's happening still. I kind of feel that things are changing, and things are more normalized, and I think we feel it. I think it's something that resonates with us, that we have a wisdom inside of us. We just need to tap into it. I think like universal truths are always there if we just listen. Like you said, like if you go into the woods for 5 days or just go into nature and start to listen, you will hear a truth there. This was so inspiring, Alfred. Tell us a little bit about upcoming conferences that you're having around the world. You're doing so much with Wisdom Together.
Yeah, actually, we started it. We are still a startup, not-for-profit association, and I founded it about last year in December. Beforehand, I did a conference in Dublin, as I said. We did a conference in Stockholm in 2015. 2016, I did some project with the United Nations and with Global Wellbeing Lab. And so I was traveling around the world, trying to find out, okay, what are the right partners for this as well? Who can I bring together to make this happening and create inspiring kind of examples as well? And then end of last year, we set up this association, which is registered in Munich in Germany, but it's a very international association. So we have about more than 70% of the members are actually from all over the world. So not only from German-speaking territories, because the idea is really to go into countries and do something locally, actually. So we're working together with local teams, and the local teams, it's not that we are going in and out. It's really about establishing a long-term relationship and a long-term project. It's not only one conference, but what we would like to do is establishing a series of conferences, workshops, and retreats, which are building on each other with teams in that countries. So which means in Norway, I'm working together with wonderful people, Pamela Healy and Eirik Solom, and so that we are creating this together, this conference there, and then hoping that we can actually also build on the energy which we are creating and on the relationships to offer more workshops, offer more retreats, offer more coaching and consulting with local coaches, entrepreneurs, and other companies, so that this could start to become a movement by itself in that countries. So I think international conferences are the purpose of that is to inspire people, but change will only happen locally. So we need to have a strong local basis and support the people who are doing something on the ground, because that is where change really happens. And so our plan is not only to do one time a conference in Oslo, but doing it more often, either on a yearly or 2 yearly base, and having in between also was a great partnership, relationships, which they can actually offer them courses and other things around that.
How can people be involved? Is it some kind of membership, or is it just to show up at the conference if you just want to be involved?
So it's an association is a membership-based, structure. So people, I wouldn't say company, because it's an association, which means it lives upon the ideas of the members. So you can become a member, you can sign up to become a member, and you can bring in your own ideas, and you can also leverage on the ideas which we So I would love to create a series of wisdom talks, for instance, from local people going there and saying, I have something to say in this particular area and I would like to create wisdom talks. It's based on the system of TED and TEDx. So there are TED conferences, big conferences, and they give people the opportunity to use also their label and do TEDx conferences in different countries. I think in Norway you had several of them already. And that is the same what we want to do with wisdom. So creating wisdom talks. We would like to leverage wisdom talks inside of companies and organizations. So customize it to their particular needs. So that we really have the opportunity to change and transform business, society, and self towards a more sustainable and compassion direction.
Beautiful. This was so inspiring, Alfred. Thank you so very much. And I'm excited about your Oslo conference. I will try to be there. And good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing to the world. Wisdom from the North is first of all, a wonderful name, which inspired me immediately when I saw this. I said, look, you guys are so connected to nature as well. And that is one fundamental element of wisdom, of coming to your own purpose and your own kind of potential, connecting to that. And that creates wisdom. And that's why wisdom from the North should really come with the wind to all over the world. And I would love to. I feel privileged to be with you today. And I hope to see you then in Oslo.
Yes,
thank you so much.
I hope so much too. And thank you so much for watching, guys. Much light from Germany and Norway. Bye-bye.